This is episode 51 of Tech Talk Live. I'm not sure why that's important, but I just feel like mentioning it. So we've done this like 50 times before, and we haven't done it in a few months. DevCon sort of derailed us, and unable to focus on more than one thing at a time, we dropped Tech Talk Live and focused only on DevCon for a while. So we're back, and hopefully we can keep this going throughout the year. We do this the first Wednesday of every month, and various technical topics. And we are ready to get going. So let me tell you a little bit about the panel we have here. We have Gabriele Columbro, who is in our professional services area in Europe. We have Jared Ottley, who actually doesn't look like he is logged in yet. I think his wife sent him on an errand, and we haven't heard from Jared yet. So once he's done getting the milk or whatever it is he was sent to do, then he will join us. But Jared is part of the engineering team and works on what's called the platform and integrations team. We have Rich McKnight, and Rich is also on the professional services team. So he's in the Americas and is kept very busy going from project to project all over the country. And then you have myself. I'm the Chief Community Officer for Alfresco, and I'm a former partner and Alfresco consultant of several years. So you have a lot of people on the panel today who are very experienced in implementing Alfresco projects and writing extensions and add-ons and things like that. So anyway, why don't we jump right into it? The rough agenda. So these are supposed to be less formal and not so much about slides. So that's why I'm calling this a rough agenda. We're going to start out with a little plug for Alfresco Add-ons, which is a new site that you should be aware of for listing your add-ons that you develop for Alfresco. Then we will move into packaging and deployment and talk a little bit about project structure and builds. And then Gab will try to convince us all to use Maven for all things Alfresco. And so we'll get into those details. So let's move right into add-ons. So I'm not sure whether or how many people have seen this. We've been talking about it in local meetups, and we've been talking about it to partners and things like that. But there's a new site called addons.alfresco.com. And what it is a directory of extensions for Alfresco. So if you've developed something that runs on top of Alfresco, extends it in some way with some cool functionality, or even if it's just an API that works with Alfresco, you can list those things in the directory. And the goal here is for add-ons not to be a code hosting site. We think there are many alternatives, a lot of people that can do a much better job of hosting open source projects and code than we can. So what we want people to do is to develop their code using whatever code hosting site makes the most sense for them, whether that's Google Code or GitHub or SourceForge or Bitbucket or whatever, and then list that project in our directory. And what that does is it gets your add-on in front of customers so that they can find it, rate it, comment on it, and then download it. Now, in the longer term, what we will do is integrate this with the product. And so that means you could be sitting in Alfresco Share in the administrator console, for example, and search for add-ons and then find them and then install them directly into your implementation without doing a restart of the product, and have a nice way to manage all of your extensions and add-ons. So that's the vision where we're headed, and obviously the starting point is having a listing or a directory of those add-ons. Now those add-ons that you see on the site are intended for community or enterprise and eventually someday cloud. You know, it's not exclusive to enterprise. It's not just community. It's not just enterprise. It's really the entire platform. I think I'll probably skip the live demo of add-ons for now, and we'll get into the sort of the packaging best practices discussion. If we have time, or if there are questions about it, we can go look at it. But I would just encourage all of you to just go to alfresco.addons.com, register for an account, and begin working with the site. A little bit on the timeline. Alfresco Forge, if I didn't mention it, this replaces the Forge. So Forge, we've already made it so that it is not accepting new projects. We've already been communicating this to Forge users. You should have seen, if you're in the Forge, you should have seen something on the Forge homepage, as well as some discussion in the forums about making Forge not accept new projects. The add-on site, etc., or the add-on site will be out of beta in February, which is now. So within the next week or two, you should see an announcement, but obviously you can start using it right away. So register for an account, start listing your add-ons. There's no reason to wait. And then we expect tight integration with the platform to happen sometime in Alfresco 5X. This is not a promise, but this is just what seems feasible. All right, so that's add-ons. And if you have any questions about add-ons, then please just put something in the chat window, and we can answer those questions. One thing I should mention is that there are about 87 add-ons in the directory right now, and a lot of those are add-ons that Richard Esplin, who's a teammate of mine, and I have just pre-populated into the directory. So if you find that your add-on, an add-on that you've developed, is already in the directory and you would like edit rights to that entry, it's not a big deal. We want this to be community driven. So if your add-on is already there and you're not already the editor of that, just let me or Richard know, and we can hook you up. That's easy to do. So not a big deal. All right, let's talk a little bit about packaging. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about you've developed some functionality that extends Alfresco, and now you want to share that in some way. And it might be as simple as you want to share it with the rest of your organization, or it might be that you want to share it more broadly by listing it as an add-on and getting other people to use it. So how do you package that thing up? And the answer is that there are a lot of ways that you can do that, a lot of different options. But what we want to promote as a best practice is to use an AMP. AMP stands for Alfresco Module Package, and it's really just a zip with a standardized directory structure. That AMP, once you produce that AMP, it gets installed into an Alfresco or a share war. And by installed, really what that means is it just gets merged into the war. And we do that using something called the Module Management Tool, or the MMT. Now, a little bit later, Gab will talk about ways to do that using Maven without the MMT. So, but if you're not there yet, if you're just using the straight out-of-the-box tools, then you would use a jar file called the Module Management Tool to install your AMP into a war. If you want to learn more, there is a wiki page on AMP files, and there is the URL. Now, I actually don't like AMPs, and so I might open it up to the rest of the panel here and find out if anyone else is with me on this. I'm not a huge fan, and here are the reasons why I don't like AMPs. First is that you have to go find that MMT jar and use it to install the AMP. And unlike just handing somebody a zip or a war that you've created, they've got to go find the MMT to install it. Now, if you're using the Alfresco installer, there's already a shell script sitting there that knows where the MMT is, so it's not a huge deal. But you know, just the fact that it takes some code that isn't necessarily standard to go work with amps is sort of a dislike for me. I've also found that in development cycles, your development cycle is elongated if you're using amps all the time, and that's because it takes a long time to copy the war, merge the war, and then deploy the war to Tomcat. So instead of just copying your files into an exploded war, using an AMP to do that is much longer. And if you're doing a lot of dev cycles, it really does add up over time, and it costs you real time. And then the other thing is that it lacks some value-added features like smart merging. So if I have an amp or if I have multiple amps and I try to merge those into the war, it is possible for some files to be overwritten and not merged in a smart way. And I just feel like if I'm going to use this tool, that I should expect it to do things like that for me. And then the last reason is that there is no undeploy. So once uninstall. Once you've installed an amp, it goes into the war, and you can list the amps that are in your war, but it's actually a little bit of a pain to remove those amps from the war once they're in there. So those are the reasons why I dislike them. Does anyone else on the panel want to add any sort of the downside of amps before we move on to why you should use them anyway?
Yeah. So I mean, I just have one more
comment. Gab, you got to speak up. I don't know if your mic is on.
Can you hear me better? Can you hear me, guys?
Yes, we can hear you.
There you go. That's better.
Okay, cool. So I think along the lines of what you were saying already, of requiring a known standard tool, I think the same thing goes around the packaging itself, apart from the tools we require. Being a zip, but in many cases you can just do things with standard architectures like JARs or even WAR. So I think that was when I first started developing with Alfresco, one of the initial kind of downsides of apps for me. Even though we worked around this, and it's probably a minor one.
Okay, this is Rich. I don't like the fact that a lot of times you have to bump up the AMP version, and the way I get around it is rather than use the out-of-the-box shell scripts, I have an AMP target that does a force, and I also a lot of times I'll just pull the original war file and use that rather than updating an already amped up war file.
Yep. Yep. That's I've done that same thing as well. It definitely helps to incorporate it into your ant build for sure. Well, so not to totally beat on amps, I guess the reason why I put that slide first is because I wanted to acknowledge that amps aren't perfect, and they're not the end-all be-all of packaging tools that we would love, but so just acknowledge that there are some shortcomings. But then I wanted to go through why I think it's important to use them anyway. And so the first thing is the name spacing is built in. So I come across, and probably all the people on the panel and a lot of people in the talk, attending the talk, have walked into companies where some Alfresco work has happened before they got there. And So it's always interesting to see sort of how things have been handled before you got there. And a common thing that I see is that people are ignoring name spacing. So they'll use non-name spaced string beans, or they'll have custom static files sitting alongside Alfresco static files, or things like that. So amps do have name spacing built in. When you have a module ID, set in your amp, then all of your config files and things like that live under a directory that matches that module ID. So the name spacing is built in, so that's awesome. Another thing is you can have bootstrapping logic with an amp. So this is kind of cool. Like if you have logic that you want to execute when the amp gets installed, you can write Java code and have that code get installed. And that's a common one way you can do. Like if you have an ACP, which is an Alfresco content package, which is what you get when you do an export out of the repo. If you have an ACP that you want to install into the repo when your module gets installed, that's one way to do it, is through this bootstrapping logic. So that's kind of nice. You can also use amps for both the repo and the share tier. So this is something that maybe people don't realize, but you can use amps in both tiers, which I think it's nice to have one tool that works in both places. Next, a repeatable deployment process for operations. So this is like IT operations. If you have some files that some config files or some extensions to Alfresco, and you've just zipped those up and you're handing those to an IT operations person and you're saying, please unzip these into Alfresco in production, their reaction to that is going to differ based on the standards and procedures of the organization, but a lot of times that's not going to fly. And the reason why is because it's very easy for them to unzip those files into the wrong place. And whereas when you use an AMP, because you're merging your files with the Alfresco WAR, you can just hand the WAR to ops and then they deploy it like any other web app. Or if they have multiple amps they're dealing with, then they can run the MMT tool, and you can just give them your amp, and the tool takes care of putting the files where they need to go instead of a person. So that makes for a nice repeatable process. The next reason is that we, and by we I mean like all of us, you and us, and the software company and the community, we really need one approach for module packaging, especially when we're talking about automating the deployment of modules into the product from something like the add-ons directory. So I think a lot of times our tool set has so many options for developers that we sort of tell people, well, there's no one way to do it. You can do it however it makes sense for you. And then when new people come to our platform, they're really confused because there are so many options for how to do things. And so I think it kind of simplifies if we can just say, look, amps are the way to do it, and only use the other ones in special cases. It also gives us a way to focus some attention on this tool to make some improvements in the tool that then can benefit everyone that's decided to use amps. And speaking of, Peter Monks, you guys may know Peter, who is a pretty colorful character, to say the least, but has been really prominent in the Alfresco community for a long time. He now owns the platform team, which means he's working on one of the things that he's working on is making the development environment more ergonomic and more friendly to developers. And so he is going to be working on making AMP and NMT improvements in the coming year. So maybe some of these little annoyances that I cited on the prior page will be taken care of here in the coming year or two. So those are, does anyone else, Rich or Gab, do you want to throw on some reasons why people should be encouraged to use AMPs?
Well, can you hear me better now, guys?
Much better.
Okay, there was a microphone problem. So I think there is one, apart from namespacing, the other great thing I like in AMPs is actually versioning. And I'm going to be, relating that, of course, from the Maven perspective in the next slide. I think that a common error that people do is actually, in certain contexts, at least they version their code, and I've seen in many contexts where this is not even done. But binaries are normally not a version, and I think the fact that MMT and AMP have a concept of versioning of modules, and you can actually upgrade modules already existing in your repository, that makes you that gives you a very flexible way of managing the life cycle of your customization.
Yeah, that's a good point. So versioning is in there, and also some light dependency declarations are in there, right? You can go into an AMP and say, well, I depend on this other AMP to work.
Yep. I remember, the only time I've actually used that was, in, of course, more complex projects where you have maybe, 5 to 10 amps. I've had mixed experiences, I would say, with that, but in general, it does work, yes. It defines the order of loading amps at bootstrap time.
Oh, that's cool. What I think would be awesome would be if AMPs worked like Maven, right, or in other platforms, and other languages have this as well, like Python, where you can just say, I require this module. And when you install the module that you're really interested in, then it goes and resolves all the dependencies. And if AMPs work that way, that would be pretty killer.
Yep. Again, I think that is supposed to, to be the way it works. I mean, I think it's not a transitive dependency management type of thing, but you can definitely define what are your direct dependencies in terms of AMPs. I have to say I didn't check that feature lately, so yeah.
What do you think about? Alberto is pointing out that he's not sure that AMPs are compatible with continuous integration. So, Gab, do you have any thoughts on using AMPs in a continuous build environment?
Well, again, I think it really depends on continuous integration. Normally, you don't just run your module, so you really need to install it in the containing Alfresco war. This is actually one of the things that I think it's more related to the current SDK that we have rather than being AMP a specific problem. In fact, I think that the current Eclipse SDK is bound to Eclipse, and so it's not suitable for automation. This is something that I will be pointing out in the next slides. One solution that I have for that is actually using a fully Maven-based build in which you can actually depend on AMPs, and that will actually allow you to build using a standard tool that all continuous integration servers understand, in a pretty easy way, pretty standard way. Again, to me, it's more related to a lack of functionalities of our SDK rather than being a problem of packaging. As long as you have an automated way of building your applications in a headless environment, I think you're fine for continuous integration testing.
Yeah. All right. So to summarize some best practices around packaging, then we really want to encourage people to package your extensions as an AMP. Right now, in the add-ons directory, we're not doing any sort of check, or we have no requirements as far as how you're packaging. But as soon as we start installing from the add-ons directory, into a running Alfresco server, we're going to likely have requirements on how these things are packaged, and so an AMP is a likely way that that's going to happen. So so definitely be looking at packaging your add-ons as an AMP. Use something smart for a module ID, and I think a reverse domain scheme is probably as good as any. So something that's unique to prevent namespace collisions would be good. Also, to address the concern I had a few slides ago about slow dev cycles, you might think about having a build that uses straight copies for your local dev, and then when you're ready to test and then QA and prod, then you can package as an AMP, and then obviously that needs to be tested on your machine prior to moving on. So it's probably a good idea to have a build that does both. Looks like we've lost our friend Rich for some technical reason, so he'll be joining us again soon, I'm sure. So we'll be glad to see him when he turns back up. All right, so deployment. Where should I stick this? If you're using AMPs, you really don't have to worry about where the files go inside the war, because the MMT does that for you. So that's actually a nice benefit of using AMPs. If you're not using AMPs, then you need to be placing your config and extensions inside the web app. So in the repo, those go in WebInf classes Alfresco extension, and in share, those go in WebInf classes Alfresco web extension. And if you want to know more about packaging and deploying, then there is a wiki page for you. So I'm being asked now. Rich is knocking on the door and wants to come in. So let me help him out real quick. Let's see how to do that. Rich, I don't know how to make you a presenter, so I'm just going to unmute you, and you can talk when you need to. Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Okay. Cool. Glad to have you back. Sorry for the disruption there. So let's see. There are some considerations. I can't remember if I have those on. Yeah. Okay. So some best practices around sort of where to put files. I've already mentioned AMPs. The second thing is I really think it's a good idea to separate your repo tier extensions from your share tier extensions. And I know there have been some examples. Sometimes you'll see this at DEF CON, and or you'll see it in various open source projects that are out there, where people will have one project. I've even done this myself. People have one project where you have repo tier extensions and share tier extensions in the same project. And sometimes those will even be packaged up in, say, one file. Like, you can, depending on the kind of extension you're doing, you can package those extensions as a jar file, for example. And some people will create one jar and put that in Tomcat shared, for example. And I think this is probably a bad practice. I think it's okay to do for when you're messing around or doing a demo or something, but it's kind of my opinion that those extensions should be separate in separate projects and then deployed separately. So I'm an advocate of not using Tomcat shared for customizations and to Alfresco, because I think in most cases, in many cases I should say, people are running Alfresco. They may run Alfresco the repository in a separate container than share, or maybe even on a separate server. And so if you've got one file that you're dealing with, it may be tough to separate that out. So Those are kind of my opinion. I don't know if Gab, you or Rich have any thoughts on sort of deployment best practices, or where you should put things.
I agree with. Well, I agree with using AMP files also. I think that the only thing, personally, I think the only thing that should go into Tomcat Shared is configuration. So if there's things that transcend the customization itself, or settings that might be set on a per repository basis, that's what I would put in Tomcat Shared. But the guts of the customization, including any properties that should, default values, I think should go in the AMP file.
Yeah, I agree. I think you should be able to pick up the Alfresco war and move it, say, between dev, test, and prod, and not make any changes. And that means that the app itself is sort of, like you said, it transcends the environment that it's sitting in. And then if you have things that are specific to the environment, then or the server, then those things could go in shared, and that keeps it nice and separate. That way, like a concrete example is like your LDAP config, right? Your LDAP config seems like that should go in Tomcat Shared, because like in dev, you might be talking to a dev LDAP server versus a test LDAP server versus a production LDAP server. Whereas your content model, that's part of the repo, that's part of the app, and that should go in the Alfresco war in the extension directory.
Jeff, I totally agree with you on this one. I'm all in favor of self-contained builds as much as possible, and also environment independent. So I will be totally happy to see the same war in transitioning between the different environments. But I think that the other point of having only configuration outside of the war, but keeping it outside of the war, is in certain environments you don't really have access yourself to modifying that. A typical example is ops or the sysadmins need to be able to maybe change certain parameters because of infrastructure changes that you're not even aware of, and that's really a simplifying factor for them to be able to to have a clear contract defined by the Alfresco global properties. They can just go there, they can edit it themselves, they don't have to mess up with the war, and I think that's a very good separation of concerns.
Yep. Okay, good. And I've just received notice that Jared has been lurking this whole time. So I've been making fun of his errand running, but he's been here unable to defend himself because he's on mute. Jared, do you know? I don't see your name, so you must be like one of these unnamed call-in users. So you might be call-in user 6. Are you there, Jared? Okay, there's a lot of wind noise here. Jared, can you mute that? Yeah, I'm gonna mute it. Okay, Jared, if you wanna add some stuff in, just let me know in some way. I'm not sure how. Okay, so let's move on to project structure and builds. And I guess the first thing to say here is that the reason why I saved this for last, I think, is because it's so subject to personal preference. And I think packaging and deployment is stuff that we can say this is the way it should be done. There's really not a lot of room here for personal preference. But in project structure and builds, people have a lot of opinions about how that should work, and in a lot of cases, from an Alfresco software perspective, it doesn't really matter to us, right? Some best practices that I'd propose here would be that more projects is usually better than one project, this just an idea here is that you have one project for sort of shared config or environment config and server settings that we talked about a second ago. And then maybe for each amp that you're developing, maybe that's a separate project. And maybe you have one project for your repo tier and one for your share tier, so that if you had 3 modules that you were developing and they each touched both tiers, then you'd have 6 projects total for those. So, you know, obviously it's possible to do everything in one huge project, but I don't know, for a big company where you have a lot of different teams doing a lot of different things in a single Alfresco implementation, that just seems like it would never work. The next is to just have a repeatable build. I think a lot of this is just standard software development best practices. So have a repeatable build. And then another one is incorporating minification. So if you're doing anything on the share tier, you'll notice that that Alfresco delivers a set of minified or compressed JavaScript, as well as a set of expanded uncompressed JavaScript. And there are switches in the framework that you can tell Alfresco, hey, use the minified or don't use the minified, and that's commonly done when you're debugging. So you should follow the same pattern, and it's really easy to go get something like the UE JavaScript compressor jar and then incorporate that into your build. And then that way you're always delivering both compressed and uncompressed JavaScript. And then the last, possibly the most contentious, or the one that's most subject to preference, is Ant versus Maven. I think a lot of people use Ant. Ant has obviously been around longer. Ant is also how Alfresco does its builds. But Maven continues to grow in popularity, and Gab is a huge fan, and others are as well within Alfresco. And I think I'll let Gab sort of take us through kind of what's available from a Maven perspective when working with Alfresco. But I do, you know, it's important to point out that just because Alfresco engineering uses Ant to build Alfresco the product doesn't mean that you have to use Ant to build your extensions, and you might find that Maven is more productive and effective for doing that. So so let's see here, Gab. I will make you the presenter, and you can yeah.
So I just want to, you know, as we transition, I just want to reiterate something you said before about the importance of namespacing. Especially when you start to have a really large enterprise, and maybe you have a shared repository with a number of customizations. And I think it's really important to have a policy around namespacing, you know, throughout the whole stack, so that you don't have 2 organizations coming up with the same package or different things like that. So I think if you are in a large organization, it's something you got to think about up front.
Yep, I think you're right. I think namespaces are definitely important, and I even find old examples that I've written where I've used just like, you know, string beans that start with the, you know, extension dot something, and I'm cleaning those up when I can. But you know, definitely people should be using unique namespaces. And I think Will Abson actually had a great set of slides at DevCon when he was doing share best practices. And by the way, for all the attendees, a lot of the DevCon, or in fact, all of the DevCon presentations are out on SlideShare. So if you go to slideshare.net and then maybe /Alfresco, I think you'll see all the DevCon presentations. But Will had a great set of slides that was sort of like, here are all the places where there are namespaces, you know, and it's about, you know, the folder structure where you put your web scripts, and you know, the module ID in your amps, and the namespace in your content model, and namespaces in client-side JavaScript components, and so on and so on. So he had a pretty good list of all the different places where you should be thinking about namespaces. So Gab, I've made you presenter. Do you want to you want to take us through some stuff on Maven here?
Yep. So
awesome.
Thanks, Jeff.
Sure.
I hope everything's going to work. So, first of all, as Jeff introduced, and if you've been following some of my Alfresco stuff, you know that I can confirm that I'm a Maven fan, and sometimes I would say more of a fundamentalist. But apart from that, just I shared this couple of slides with you just to give you an idea of, I'm not just a fundamentalist. Most of the reasons why I, started working on Maven with Alfresco and why, I try to push this approach is because of, some of the things that I saw as a partner before, and I see right now in the field when I go to, our customers. And, again, as Jeff was saying before, most of these are general software development best practices. But especially when people are working, not from scratch, but against the framework. So framework development, I don't know, for some reason, people expect to have a fully packaged product, so they don't really consider that extension as fully fledged module to be treated as a proper software project. So, we've been talking about namespacing. I've been saying, no packaging at all, manual copy paste, and again, for example, using amps, the limitation of not being able to remove amps or remove existing configuration in there makes it very error prone, and especially, I found very difficult working in large contexts to actually foster reuse and sharing of settings as well as customization between different projects. And for example, I worked in contexts where there were 4 or 5 different teams in different locations working on Alfresco projects, and they were ending up each one of them deploying their own Alfresco war, even though it was for the same enterprise. So in order to overcome that, most of my consultancies are not just about the content, helping them on how to implement Alfresco, but even around the process. So I'm really focused around providing people with a standard process of developing around Alfresco. And yes, my preference there, probably for previous experiences, that for a number of limitations that I see in the SDK, is definitely a Maven. So I think that there are limitations both from a community standpoint and, of course, from an enterprise standpoint in the current SDK, which is, of course, Eclipse and ANT based. And I think that that is really, due to the fact that I'm used to something more than just a build tool. So Maven covers other aspects like dependency management, like even legal aspects and licensing aspects around your artifacts, as well as a full life cycle of your project. So I think that that area, enterprise processes can be really impacted by the lack of integration, as I think was that Alberto was commenting before. There is very difficult integration with typical enterprise processes like continuous integration, or any type of pretty much of automation. While from a community standpoint, and I think that will be also a great improvement, Alfresco is not available for quick download and evaluation on mainstream channels. And of course, I'm thinking here about Maven Central, like most of the open source artifacts, J2E artifacts around. And it forces you to work pretty much against one environment, which is Eclipse. And you need to, learn a certain procedure that is not standard, according to me, and you need to read lots of documentation. So, in that standpoint, I think Alfresco, for how well it is designed, and for how easy readable its code is, could be much easier to develop on. So, before digging into, let's say, what's available with Maven and Alfresco, I want to, reiterate what Jeff was saying before. what we are talking about here is actually building Alfresco Add-ons, Alfresco applications using Maven. And that is a completely different thing from the way Alfresco builds its product. I think that's pretty clear difference to share with you in order to also manage some expectations. So at the moment, there is no plan to build Alfresco with Maven, but there are a number of resources available in order to allow you to integrate Alfresco applications in your standard Maven development process. So almost 5 years ago now, when I was a partner, I approached Alfresco. I started developing on it. I realized it was a very neat web app that I could use with my beloved Maven. And so I project after project, I basically frozen my achievements in an open source project, which is called Maven Alfresco Lifecycle, that provides a set of Maven archetypes, which are project prototypes for you to start quickly developing around Alfresco. And of course, we have an AMP archetype, which allows you to build, and to support the AMP packaging, which is a known standard package. Among other projects, it is used by our friend Peter and by the integration team in the Jive toolkit, or it was used previously in the bulk input tool. So this set of archetypes and plugins, it is hosted in maven.alfresco.com. We'll talk about it a little bit later. And in the spare time, I'm trying to refresh it and testing it also with Alfresco 4.0. I can't stress more how much more contribution will be appreciated there. We are more than 50 to 100 members in the Google groups. But if you want to join, it's pretty easy. Maven-Alfresco Google groups will be your subscribing address. So if you want to know more in detail about how it works, there is a wiki page that I've been maintaining over the last years.
So Gab, is it true that then both community and enterprise artifacts are now available in the Maven repo, or?
I will have a final slide for that, but let's say community artifacts are already there. Have been there, let's say, manually maintained since a couple of years. Enterprise artifacts will be there. That's the plan, and they will be there, I believe, in the next month. We need to automate the procedure and to, let's say, validate a little bit more. But yes, the plan is to have enterprise artifacts available on maven.alfresco.com on a specific enterprise repository.
Cool.
Anyways, I'll be covering that in a couple of slides. Again, I'm not going to go too much into the detail of this, but it is a quite lively project. There is still a lot to do, so I'm really open for your suggestions if you want to join in the group. And we have 4 or 5 active committers, so that there is some activity. We have archetypes. We can manage the dependencies. Talking about what we were saying before, some namespacing. Maven has, of course, built-in namespacing by the means of group ID and artifact ID. One feature of these archetypes is that actually once that you define artifact ID and group ID, that will be your single sourcing, let's say your single source for identification of your module. And that will be, filled wherever it's needed inside the AMP. So for example, in module properties. So that's, I think, a very good feature. The same goes for the version, of course. So the version of your Maven artifact will be the version of the module. So that helps you really to manage AMPs in a proper way. Apart from AMPs, and I mean, I'm gonna not cover this today, it's probably a bit too much, but we have also archetypes for extensions. So for building customized words of Alfresco and Share. So you might want to have a look at the wiki for.
Are there, hey Gab, Sujay is asking if there's an archetype for Spring Surf.
Not yet. There is in a branch an archetype that I've been requested, well, I've been discussing in the list and also DevCon, which is an archetype for web quick start, which I think is, pretty much a very good example of a best practice application build a Spring Surf. So what we're planning to do is actually to have an archetype which allows you to start a quick start project. Sorry for the play on words, in a very quick fashion, and providing some of the best practice of how you can customize it.
Okay.
I of course, any contribution in that area, so any idea that you want to shoot to maven-alfresco@googlegroups.com, that's always very appreciated. I have some ideas here for the roadmap for the next releases, so meaning doing a general cleanup, allowing you to do test-driven development. That is something that I see lacking a lot in nowadays, Alfresco customization development. But again, these are all roadmap features. So if you have any suggestion, I'll be happy to hear them, and if you have contributions, even happier. So closing here and back to what Jeff was asking before, we have this infrastructure is based on a repository, a Nexus repository, which is available at maven.alfresco.com. It's been a community repository. Historically, it's been created in 2009 and hosts, let's say, most of Alfresco artifacts, jars and wars. Of course, there are no POM available because, not being Alfresco building with Maven, we don't have an explicit dependency declaration there. But at the moment, let's say the deployment has been still manual by me up to now. So there might be some version missing. Let me know if you find them, and I'll be happy to help there. More on the enterprise side of you supporting our customers on Maven. Up to now, if you wanted to use Maven, you had to host enterprise artifacts on your own corporate repository. So now the target is to, I have a procedure ready to be committed to actually deploy, make available enterprise artifacts on maven.alfresco.com. So I think that will be a very good simplification for most enterprise contexts that want to directly work against Maven, with Maven against Alfresco. Closing up, as I said, I have already procedure that we're gonna hopefully commit soon for automating the deployment to the Maven repository. And Nick, in the last couple of weeks, one of our engineers, I started, did some commits on a little bit making more granular our dependency definition in the SDK. So for the smaller modules, we have now a clear definition, at least in the Eclipse.class files, of specifically which module depends on which library. So I think that's a good initial step towards a more modular dependency definition in Alfresco. I think that was about it. Unless you guys have more questions, I think I took already enough time.
So one question comes from Jai Hai, who's asking if we have third-party jars in an AMP, MMT doesn't really manage that dependency, and so I guess he's asking two questions: is that going to be improved, and can Maven help with that?
I didn't really get the question. So he's saying if in an AMP we have third-party jars.
I guess what he means is if I have a dependency on third-party jars, and there's really no way to declare that in an AMP.
Yep. And,
yes.
From, let's say, if you look at the Maven Alfresco AMP archetype, which is, by the way, available on maven.alfresco.com, so you have it in the catalog there. Basically, whatever dependency your AMP has, you just declare it as a standard Maven dependency, and the build process will put it into the /lib folder of the produced amp, so that then when you install it either with the MMC or using Maven, that will be automatically unzipped into the Alfresco web inlet. So yes, I think that from this standpoint, one other thing that Maven might help you with is to automatically retrieve transitive dependencies of your amp.
Yeah, that's cool. All right. All right. Well, I think why don't you go to the next? Do we have any slides after this, or this is probably it, huh?
This is probably it. Yep.
Okay. Well, if you guys have questions, we will take questions. I'll also like to remind you that we have our next Tech Talk Live is happening in March, the first Wednesday of March, and the topic will be Alfresco and Drupal working together. So that is March 7th. My calendar is not lying to me. So definitely register for that Tech Talk Live and join us back if you have join us on that day if you have interest in running Alfresco and Drupal together. Let's see, do we have any other questions coming in? Hopefully this was helpful. I know this wasn't really a how-to. It wasn't really intended to be a how-to. I think there are probably some wiki pages that can help you package your stuff as an AMP. I have an example or two out there. I may do something more explicit to really hammer home how to make this happen, or how to package your stuff as an AMP. Rich, you had said that you're working on a document that talks about namespaces, and I was wondering if that document is going to be available to the community, or if that's something that's just internal, or what's the scope of that document that you're working on?
Currently it's internal, and I've shared it with a couple of partners. I guess if we get a decent review of it, I probably want to also look at it vis-a-vis Will's document, and then maybe we can go ahead and distribute it. Yeah,
that might be good. You know, on add-ons, one of the things that we're doing is right now we have, you can go there and browse for add-ons, or you can submit an add-on, and then we have a link to resources for building new add-ons. And right now that just links over to the wiki. But you know, I'd really like to get us get a lot better as far as like resources for people that are brand new to our platform on how to create these add-ons. And so I think you know, some coverage of namespacing and you know, things like what we've presented here today, I think having that all in one place for someone just to read and say, okay, how do I get started? What are the tools? And you know, would be a big help for people that are new to the platform.
Okay.
All right. Well, another Tech Talk Live has come and gone, and I appreciate all the time that you guys have spent with us today and the questions. So, oh, I'm seeing another question about Alfresco Forge from Steve, and I know that it has been down. I didn't know it had been down for 2 days. I knew that it was going to temporarily be down as it's moving its home to another server. So yes, it's supposed to be a temporary problem, and we will be keeping Forge on for the indefinite future, even though it won't be taking new projects. So we want to give Forge, people that are on the Forge now, we want to give you plenty of time to move your projects. So our goal is to not make any quick moves there. So it's not going to go away unexpectedly. So if after this call, I'll go find out if it's still down, and if so, why. But that should not be the case. Let's see. Then Steve has another question about Windows installers. You're talking about the Alfresco, the binary installer from 3.4 on, are missing batch files that made running Alfresco without the service and files for installing amps. So those batch files are gone from the community installers. That's what Steve is saying. Does anyone know? Does anyone else on the panel notice that? Or I will. I'll take an action, Steve. That's the kind of thing actually that, you know, if you would submit a JIRA on that, that would be great, because that should not be the case. I'm not aware of why we would take those away on purpose. So anyway, Steve, if you could submit a JIRA on that, I think that's probably the most efficient way to get something done about the Windows community installer. And I'm also getting an update that Richard Esplin is looking into the Forge issue, so we'll have that taken care of.